right. We are right at the top of the hour, so let's get going. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Max Days 2023, day 2. In this session, we are going to look at the different ways that you can approach teamwork with MAXQDA. So my name is Joel Drevlo. I am a MAXQDA cooperation partner and a certified trainer based out of, excuse me, Boston, Massachusetts, USA. Go Red Sox, I should say. This topic is really one of my favorite things to talk about when I'm working with folks and training people on MAXQDA. I find team-based analysis is really an exceptional way to do this kind of work, to work with qualitative data. If I'm being honest, I'm probably a little biased. I was fortunate enough to have a really excellent mentor that taught me about qualitative data analysis and MAXQDA in this fashion. We did a lot of team-based analysis together with colleagues in our organization, and it was just a really excellent training opportunity for me. So we will talk about some of these reasons that I feel team-based analysis is a good option throughout the session. So we'll look at some of those conceptual pieces a little bit. But specifically, I want to highlight as well some of the training options or opportunities that you have if you're working with new analysts. If you're working with students, it's a really great way to approach learning this stuff, to actually get your hands into it and to do some work with it. So if you want a bit more detailed commentary on this, you can also check out the practice of qualitative data analysis. I believe that's in the Expo session or Expo section in Hopin. You can find the MAXQDA press there. I co-wrote a chapter there with some colleagues about our experience doing this. So if you really want to read about it, you can find some stuff there. There's also a couple really excellent publications that are available there specifically on team-based analysis, full textbooks, and those are linked in the handout section for today as well. So let's go ahead and jump into this. Our session agenda, our goals for today, I'm going to outline some of these big picture pieces before we get into the actual demonstration, where I'll show you how to actually set these things up for teamwork, exchange, or merge. It's helpful to get a sense of how these options flow, so what this workflow looks like, and then to see some of the project management considerations before we get into the actual demonstration. So you kind of get a sense of how all these pieces fit together. Again, the idea of just seeing this workflow from a few different vantage points gives you a good sense of what you need to prep for, how you need to organize your team before you start analysis. And so, as we get going, we'll kind of proceed in this fashion. I'm going to talk about some of the specific options for teamwork. I'm going to talk about some of the project management considerations. So how do you divide your roles? How do you get to a routine? And then I'll give the actual demonstration of some specific tools that you can use to stay organized, and then also the actual teamwork exchange process. So let's go ahead. So when we talk about teamwork options, there's really probably 4 different ways that you could do this. And these are kind of listed here probably in degree of ease to work with. Team Cloud is kind of its own thing. So that's kind of a little bit of an outlier, but the easiest, the most straightforward method to do this is a single file. So essentially you pass a file back and forth. You do your section of analysis in the file, you email it, or upload it to a cloud location. Your colleague downloads it onto their computer and they add their work. And you keep passing that file back and forth until you're done. That's the most straightforward option, but it's slow because you have to finish your work before they can start their work. You can't work sort of in a concurrent fashion. So it's nice in the fact that it's very simple, very straightforward to do. If you have the time, that's probably the best way to do this because there's no complications. You're not going to run into any conflicts or anything as you start to merge data or segments in your project file. The second option is to use a merge option. And so if you come to the Home tab in MAXQDA, you'll find all of the teamwork options listed here in the center. And so we have an option to export teamwork, import teamwork, and we also have the options to merge projects. So merge would be this second option here. Merge is pretty straightforward in terms of how it works. You have 2 project files and you merge them together. There are some considerations there. Typically, the way that this works best is when you have different content in both project files. And I'm going to show you an explicit example of this, and so you'll get to see how that works. But usually you would have different documents. And in some cases, if you're doing intercoder checks or intercoder reliability, they would technically be the same documents, but they would be organized in different document groups. And so you would sort of, I guess, have a duplicate in a way, but they're stored in different document folders. And that allows you to compare your coding across the two groups. So that's probably the most frequent use of merge. But it might also be a sense where if I have 10 interviews, you take 5, I take 5. We can use the same code system. Or we can develop different code systems and merge those together. Now that gets a little bit tricky because then you have to combine things. So typically you'll want to have agreement on a code system. That's going to make your life a lot easier in terms of how you merge these things together. But I suppose you could do it the other way. It would just take a little bit of extra work to get all those things situated properly. The third option is to use an exchange file. And so the exchange file allows you to work with duplicate project files. So if I have 3 people in my team, everybody gets the same project file. So it has all the same data. So it has the same document system. It has the same code system. And what I would need to do if you were a project manager in this case, and you'll want to have a project manager if you're doing exchange files, is you would need to designate who works where. The issues arise when you have conflicting work. So if you and I work in the same document and we code it differently, MAXQDA is going to want to choose a winner. And unfortunately, you can't have, if you've coded the same segment, it can't be in the same place twice. So it has to either extend or shrink those coding stripes. So it's perfectly possible to do this. You just need to be organized, and it takes maybe a time or two, and you sort of figure out this work process and how it works. Then the last option is going to be your team cloud. And team cloud, I would say, is probably closest to this exchange file operation in that everyone has the same file, and it's an additive process. So they add, new coded segments to the project file, or potentially new codes. And then those get integrated. And the easiest way to explain that is just to show you a picture here. So the logistics of this, a team cloud, everyone in your project needs to have a MAXQDA subscription, right? So you have to have a license to use MAXQDA, but only one user needs a license for Team Cloud. And then they can invite up to 4 people with that license. Now you can increase that number if you have a larger team than that, but that's usually pretty common. I would say in teams, they don't usually get much larger than that, but you certainly could. You can add to your subscription. And it sort of follows this cycle in that your team lead will create a project locally, so on their computer. They upload that to the cloud. Then they invite members. So you have to, the team members have to just create an account so that you're able to be invited, essentially. You kind of creating an ID in a way. You're invited onto the project. You get the project file. You add your work. You submit your work to the file. And when everyone has submitted their work, the team lead integrates that work into the project file. So we are at this piece here, imports. And so the team lead at this point can decide, do I need to do more work? Are we done with this project? Do we still have more work to go? And they can either initiate a new cycle, in which case we start over here and we just continue this loop until we're done, or the project is finished. And so these points here where you start a new cycle are the opportunities to sort of consolidate things. You can change things in your code system. Midstream in the project, that becomes difficult because MAXQDA is looking for those name designations to match work. So, but this point does allow you to do some of those options to change things throughout your project file and sort of get things updated to where you want them. So Team Cloud can be a really nice piece because if you're working with multiple people, as you'll see in a second when we do the exchange file, you have to stage things. I can only merge, I can only integrate one project at a time. So if I have 3 teammates, I have to do that process twice. And so it's not the end of the world, right? But we're busy. And so having an opportunity where some of this stuff is done for you is nice. And just in terms of keeping your team on track and keeping things sort of on cycle, dealing with less project files, all that good stuff. So it's definitely an option to check out if you do a lot of team-based analysis. So we've talked about the teamwork options, and I am going to demonstrate these in a few minutes here, so you'll get a chance to see sort of what that looks like. But I do want to provide just a little bit of commentary here on some of the project management aspects of this. So when we take a look at this, one of the first things that you want to consider is sort of how do you set a routine for this? If it's typically the way that this will work is early on, you'll want to do some group analysis. And what that allows you to do, you can do this virtually, you can do this in person. It's been so long since I've done this in person, but it is really fun to get together in a room, have a big projector, and put all your work up. But typically you do that over Zoom or Microsoft Teams, some kind of video conferencing software. And essentially what you do is you do coding together. So you do step by step, whether you're reading interviews or going through survey data or analyzing literature. You do this work together as a team. And sort of what that helps you establish is, consensus, I guess, for lack of a better word. Just it gives you a good feel in terms of how your code should be applied, when it should be applied, when it shouldn't be applied, what to do in cases where you have questions. It just gets everybody on the same page. It's a really great way to build rapport among your team, to have those discussions. It really is the fun part of this work is diving into this interesting analysis and discussing it with people. It's stimulating, right? So that's the first part. Include people. Start that from the very beginning, and go slow. Take your time, build these things out, and as you do that, document your work. So, anything that you come on should be included in your, so this is not a great example, it's an empty memo. You'll want to include these things in your code memos, so code definitions, examples, coding comments, especially these examples. These are going to be really helpful for you to have anchor examples of when to apply this code, when not to apply this code. If you want to go so far as to use the intercoder agreement checks, you can do that as well. So you can do that as kind of a check to sort of see, are we being consistent? Where do we need to have some discussions? Which codes are we breaking down on? Those kinds of things. So that's a really helpful part of the process. And I think it's kind of an enjoyable part of the process. Maybe I'm just a project management nerd, but it's kind of fun to include some of those pieces as an aspect of your work. The next piece is to make use of some of the product features in MAXQDA. So one of the great ones is document sets. And you see that I've already got one of those specified here, analysis for Jim. So what's great about document sets is they're temporary. So you can remove that and it does not affect any of the data or any of the work that you've done. It's just it's a placeholder. Essentially, it's a bookmark. And so you can specify these things in the naming conventions. You can put in names. If it's an individual person doing the analysis, you can put in teams. It also allows you to include memos on these. So if you need to include any specific instructions or any specific due dates, maybe what your research questions are, these are great things to do to include any of that metadata. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to make everything self-contained. I don't have to go over to a Teams chat log to find out what's the code definition or when is this due. It's all in MAXQDA. It just makes communication a lot easier, right? Having everything based in a single piece of software. And then when you have questions or issues, it's still all contained in that project file. So these are really helpful pieces to sort of stay organized as you go. So the document sets is probably one of the first one. Document colors can also be really helpful. So for example, you'll see if I right click in here, this is currently like a goldenrod. One example of this, a project I was working on, we would integrate data, and a part of our research was actually providing feedback about people's writing as we were doing the analysis. So I would have to assess documents to make sure that they were quality controlled before our student analysts actually did the analysis. And so I designated that with colors. So anytime something was good, I would come in and I would change it to green. When my students needed to do work, they would come in they would right click and they would activate by color, and they would select all of the green documents, and then they knew everything that they were working on um, was was ready to go, was something that they should be doing analysis on. That's a great process. Just be careful with it. If you forget to update some colors here and there, it can cause you problems. So you just need to be sort of disciplined, I guess, in how you apply those document colors. But they can be really useful pieces. You can also use those in your code system as well. Obviously, we have code colors for our codes. Same activation applies. You can activate specific codes by color. So if you wanted to um, make sure that your team was only using those codes, you could activate by color. I can filter here and I have only what I'm supposed to be working on. So again, just another way to stay um, organized and just make sure that you're working in the right spot. Memos, of course, are a great way. We saw some of that with the code memos. You can also track a lot of stuff, for example, up in your project memo, which is the top level memo. There's only one of those in your project file. And here is where you track the global pieces. So what are your research questions? What are your goals? What are your dates? What are the teams? What are expectations? Who do you go to with questions? All of these different things can be included right here. Everybody has all that information, and it's smack dab at the top of your project. So it's just an easy way for people to get the information that they need. Let's see what else. Code system organization, I think, is the last piece I'll talk about. One way you can do this is to actually, you can build out your codes with particular steps. So if I were to create something here, I would literally label it step 1 and then code. As I create this, then I can create another one, step 2, code. And so essentially I can, order this. So if I'm working with someone, and this comes back to that idea of training new analysts, you want to make this as easy as possible, right? The easier this is for them to do the coding and to do the analysis, the more brain power they're putting into interpretation and into analysis, right? So literally spelling it out. Do this first, do this second, do this third. And typically you'll want to figure out a way to structure that. Like in our project, we were working with doing some very basic structural coding for like audience or type of activity. So we had these broad categories. It's a nice way to get people into a rhythm because you get these little successes along the way. It's easy to code those things and you sort of feel good about what you're doing. And then when you get to the trickier parts where you're doing some actual interpretation of things, you've got some of those wins under your belt, I guess, so to speak. So that can be another piece to build these up, just to make this straightforward for people, so they know exactly what order to go in. One last thing that I like to include is I don't know code at the top. Anytime you have those issues where it's a border case, doesn't make sense, you think it's something interesting, but you don't know where it goes, you drop it in there. And then when you meet for your debrief sessions or when you get together as a team, you go through those things one by one. And that is really helpful towards building out consensus about what your code system means. And it's just a really good discussion piece to get people talking about what they're seeing or why they were confused about this and those kinds of things. So it's a good conversation piece. I think that takes care of most of the features that you can use. And again, there's nothing complicated about these. They're basic MAXQDA features. It's just a process, right? It's including things consistently, being consistent with your labels, being consistent with your colors, being diligent about your memos, thinking about how you organize your code system. It's nothing complex, but it is good practice. Okay, last thing I want to talk about here, project management roles. This is really straightforward. Have a project manager. You need to have someone who makes those decisions. In the case of code conflicts, which project file wins out, or how do you establish that criteria? When you have questions about application of the code system, who answers those? You need to have somebody who is kind of the final voice on that. Obviously, there should be discussion. We don't want somebody dictating terms, but there does need somebody that makes a final decision on that. It's going to make things go faster. You can also have team leads, so they'd be sort of a step below, I guess, the project manager, and so they handle most of the functional stuff, answering questions and things like that. But ultimately, decisions are going to be made by the project manager. And then, of course, you have your analysts who are doing most of the actual analysis and potentially doing the write-up as you go. So designating those roles just makes things a lot smoother as you go. You know who to ask for questions. You know how to get those kinds of decisions made. All right, so let's jump over to the actual demonstration here. So I'm going to show some of these specific pieces here. So let's take a look at first the merge file. So I've got a couple other projects I'm going to open here. So I have two, you can see them here, work-life balance. These are just the example project files that I've cut up. A naming convention is nice here. I've included the name of the analyst. I've included the date, today, and the year. And so this is nice because it allows you to know whose project file was this, when was it done. You could also include an aspect on here like analysis finished or something like that. This, when you're keeping track, if you're doing this in many cycles, keeping track of all these files, update those names. It's going to make life a lot easier for you so you know which file you're using. But let's take a look at these files. So if I open up Alice's file, you'll see that she's only working with survey data and Twitter data. Right, so she's got these 55 survey responses and a whole bunch of Twitter data. If I open up my file, you can see that I've got interviews, focus groups, and video interviews. So we have two completely different types of documents. So when I go to do the merge projects, I'm not going to have any problems because I don't have any duplication across my project files. I'm working with entirely different data. So to do this, I come up to the merge projects option. Actually, no, there's one step I need to do first. I'm going to create a new project. So I'm going to save this project as, and I'm going to change this to work-life balance instead of Joel. I'm going to change this to complete. And I will save it in this folder I'm working with. One thing, if you haven't heard this before, always work from a local source. You can pass files, especially with teamwork, you can pass them using the cloud, but they always need to be downloaded. So if you're using Box or OneDrive or Google Drive, you can pass them that way, but they always need to be downloaded to your desktop or some local directory to be worked on and merged, and then you can pass them back up. Just make sure you're not working directly from the cloud location because it can do some screwy things. Okay, so this was Joel's file before. I've renamed it complete because I want to maintain that original file, right? Just in case something goes wrong. So I'm going to merge projects here. I'll navigate to that teamwork folder that I've got, and I will choose Alice's file. I'll merge this in. The options that you're seeing here, so project memo. I need to decide whose project memo am I keeping. This is usually not a difficult thing. This should be, if you're organized well, this should be the same in both projects, but you can specify, in addition to code memos and the logbook. So whose do you want to track? The file you're currently working in, which is the opened project, or the imported project, the target project. So I'm just going to leave these as open. There's also options to not import existing documents. So if I have any duplicates, that it will get ignored. And any document groups or document sets that have the same name, they'll get merged. So they'll get stuck together. So any documents that you had would be pasted into that new folder. So if I click OK here, it's going to tell me it wants a backup. And it's just saying if something goes wrong, you've got a backup of this file. And you can see it merges in my documents. So now I have interviews, focus group, video interface, survey data, and Twitter data all in one project file. So I've got it all together in one place. So if you have divided your work accordingly, a merge project file works for that. Or if you want to do an intercoder check, you have your documents labeled with your name, their documents labeled with their name, merge them into a single project, and you can do your intercoder checks. So if we were to do, let me go back to my demonstration file. If we wanted to do a Exchange file where I wanted to grab certain pieces, again, because we have duplicate files. Um, let's see how we would set that up. So I come to my teamwork options. The first thing I need to do is export. So I need to export data to an Exchange file. And here I get to specify what I want. So you can do it here in the in the window that appears here. You can just check the stuff that you want. You can also activate certain things here. So I can activate my interviews. Yeah, I have 10 interviews. If I open this up, I can insert activated documents. It'll grab exactly what I want. If I click next, I can pull whichever codes I want. Notice that they will collapse here on the parent level codes. So any place you see this arrow, you'll want to make sure that you want all those subcodes. We'll just bring them all along. We get a readout here, how many documents, how many codes, how many coded segments. And what this is going to do is this is going to create an Exchange file. And usually what I like to do is to add Exchange at the end. You'll see that there's a different extension. Okay, so this has been exported. If I open up, grab my Mac Finder here. If I open this up, you'll see I have a file that's MEX. MEX, it's a subtle difference, right? X, MX, MEX. So I like to add this Exchange in there just to know what I'm working with. And if I wanted to open this up in a new file, if I wanted to integrate the work that someone else has added, I simply open the file I'm interested in adding to, and I import that file. I use my navigator to grab this Exchange file, and I open it. And so I want to show you these options that will display here. I'm not going to integrate the actual stuff because it's already in here, but you'll see in this column, I get my Exchange file. Here I have my target. So you'll want to pay attention to this because if I have data, new coding work done in this file, I want to drop it specifically into this document. So you'll want to make sure that these match properly. And then you can also pull in your code system. Note up here, new codes are displayed in green. So if your partner has added any new codes, they will be displayed there. So you can check which are new and confirm that you want those or if you don't want those. And then you can integrate those into your file. The last option that's going to show here is how do you want to handle the import? So this is what I was talking about. In case of existing coded segments, this option allows you to specify. So overwrite means use basically everything that's in the incoming file. So if their boundaries are different than the opened file, it's going to take those. You can sort of split the difference. If I do outer segments, it's going to look in both files and it's going to say which coded segment is the longest, and it's going to take that one. Or I can do the inner intersection. So which one would be the shortest? Or I can keep the existing boundaries in my project. So this is where you need that project manager to decide ultimately who sort of wins out in those issues. You can also overwrite comments. You can overwrite weights. So if you have code weights that you've established, opportunity to specify variables and summaries, sort of where you want to place those. The one issue you'll probably run into most frequently if you're using the same codes and you are consistently updating your code memos is this option here. So as a project manager, it may be necessary for you to carry over some of those code memos because you're gonna have to pick one or the other. So if your partner and you both have new data in your code memos, you need to integrate that manually, unfortunately. And so I'm going to click cancel there. We already have this project file built into, we already have all this data in our project file. So you get a sense of sort of how that works, how you need to set things up in terms of how you want to organize sharing your files back and forth. So just to review a couple of things, your naming conventions are real important. So make sure that you label your files precisely. Just makes it easier to know which files you want to grab and which files you need to draw from. Naming conventions in your document system are important, making sure that I have clear directions for where people should be working and what they should be working on. Making sure that I have nice, clean code memos to make sure that our application of the code system is consistent. Even if we follow all the steps functionally right to merge the projects, if we're not applying codes in the same fashion, our teamwork's kind of sketchy. So you'll want to make sure that you have this stuff based properly as well. The team cloud options, you do see those built in. Again, you do need if you're a team member, you need to have an account. If you're a team lead, you need to have sort of a license to the team cloud. And essentially what you would do is create your account. You would, through these options, you would activate your team cloud license with the license key you get from the Clever Bridge shop. Once you've put that in, you'll have some more options that appear here to upload. So you'll create a project locally and you'll upload that project. And when you're ready, you can then send it out to the email or to the people that you've invited to the project. You'll actually handle that through the through your web-based account rather than directly in the MAXQDA application. So Team Cloud is pretty cool. There are some, I would encourage you, if you're interested in it, to check out those publications in MAXQDA Press. There's also some really great webinars, recorded webinars that show more of a demonstration. It's hard to do a demonstration of Team Cloud with one person because you're constantly opening and signing out and team member, team lead. So some of those videos that have been created have that put together in a much more concise manner. So I check those out on YouTube if you're interested to see more about that process. There's also a really great quick start guide that's maybe about 5-10 pages where it gives you a really detailed view of the workflow and the project cycle, like what steps happen first and sort of how you work through a Team Cloud project cycle. So some really cool options there. I believe in the new version as well, there's some new features that have been added with Team Cloud as well to do some kind of more advanced sentiment analysis and things like that, or thematic analysis. I'm kind of blanking on that. If you check the update publication, it should tell you specifically what it can do. A little bit more advanced than stuff you can do in the native program on your computer. So we're right at 30 minutes. I'm going to stop here and see if there's any questions. Pop over to the question Q&A tab. All right, good. We do have a few in here. Oh, actually, this one's been answered already. Here's just how many licenses purchase. Yeah, it looks like that one was answered. Again, you only need one license, and then you can invite 4 members. They do need, just to be clear, they do need a MAXQDA license, so you have to have a license for the software, but not for Team Cloud, just to make sure we're clear on that. Very good question. In our work, the team lead usually applies the coding scheme to the data set. Coding scheme developed iteratively by several members before we apply it, then 2 to 3 verifiers check that the coding scheme was applied correctly to the data set. In this scenario, does it make sense to use a single file or Team Cloud? I mean, if you are planning on using like an intercoder check, I think you could probably do this in either way. 2 to 3 verifiers. You can absolutely do this with the basic. You can absolutely do this with the basic options. The only complication that you're going to run into is that with 2 to 3 coders, you'll have to do this in stages, right? So you'd have to integrate one person's work and then another person's work. So there's just a couple more. There's an extra step or two that's involved there, but you could absolutely do it with the built-in options. Again, you would want to have things set up properly. So if you're having others verify the coding, you'd want to make sure that the documents that they coded were in their own document group, right? And that way, when you bring it into the complete file, you can actually run those intercoder checks. So you'd have essentially duplicate documents of those individuals in there. That would be a fairly straightforward way to process it. And again, if you want to check through, there's a whole chapter in the manual on intercode. And I don't know if you're using the intercoder options. It's kind of nice in that it shows you where there's discrepancies, and it does give you some statistics about that. I guess I wouldn't use them, purely as is. I view it more as a discussion piece that it allows you to discuss. And it sounds from your description here, it kind of sounds like that's the case. Yeah, you could certainly do that with the inborn options. And in this case, you would want to be using that exchange file would probably be the most straightforward way to do it. It's a little bit easier to use the exchange file too because you're passing smaller files back and forth. Could you please show the best way to lay out a multiple coder project to assess integrator reliability? Sure. Um, so essentially what you would be doing is you'd be applying the same codes. So your code system shouldn't change, right? Your code system you need to maintain um, across both projects. And essentially what you would be doing would be you'd be duplicating. So let me see. Why don't I just create new project? Call this intercoder demo. It's always exciting to do this stuff on the fly. We'll see if I can do this properly. I have some data I can pull in here. Let's grab crash course. And so I'm just going to pull in some interviews. So interview transcripts, I'm just going to drop those in here. Okay, so I pulled these in, and let's go ahead. Actually, I can delete this document out of here. Let's say I'm just going to do these 10 interviews. They're separated in the example project file, but I don't need to do that. So I'm going to create a new document group, and we'll say interviews Joel. And so I could essentially activate all these. Let's see. I can move these here. I'm going to go ahead and should be an option to duplicate this. Do I have to do it on the level of that document? I do. So essentially, if I had, I'm not going to do that 10 times just for the sake of time. I'm going to create a new document group. Let's say interviews Sarah. And so I would put these over here and make sure you want to change this name so that they have the same name in each document. And so essentially, I would have these files, and I would probably create two, just to make sure that nobody's peeking if I have any of my work in here. I would probably create one file with my interviews and one file with Sarah's interviews. I would do my analysis. She would do hers. Then I would use that merge option right here, and I would merge those back together again. Once I've done that, I can then use, again, that's in the analysis, I can use the intercoder, and it's gonna ask you to select two different groups, right? Coder 1, coder 2. And so interview Sarah would be 1, interviews Joel would be 2. Type of agreement is gonna look at how closely do you wanna look. So code occurrence in the document is gonna be your widest net, right? Like this document's 20 paragraphs long. As long as the code occurs somewhere in there, we're good. Code frequency is going to count how many times. And then this one, the most precise, is going to look at how close are they. So if they're actually applied in the same segments. And so you can actually be pretty precise with this. Note that you can also specify for specific codes. So I can look at specific documents and specific codes. So if maybe I'm not done yet, I haven't finished all of the project, all of the interviews, but I want to check maybe as like a mid-project check. I could just select the work that I'm done with, or the codes that I'm done with, or in discussion I've noticed I have a particular problem with one or two codes. I could focus in on those. Again, just being specific with the information that you want to look at. There's a really great breakdown of this in the step-by-step with screenshots and stuff in the manual that will walk you through this sort of more in depth. And it also explains some of the statistics and the different ones that you can choose that get counted out. All right, I'm going to see, just checking the chat here. Cool. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions yet in the chat. So if you do have any other questions about specifically about teamwork or really anything in MaxQDA, we've got about 5 minutes left. If you have any questions about any of the projects you're working on now or any other aspects, I'm happy to try and answer those as well. Just seeing that we can use up the last 5 minutes or so that we have together today. Let me see if I can pull this up here. Demonstrate this real quick. So on the MaxQDA Press, just to show you some of those specific works, if you wanted to look at the chapter that some colleagues and I wrote, it's, I believe, one of the last chapters in here. We go through our process and sort of a little bit of this is about how we actually train folks. So that's a little bit of a different wrinkle here. But if you want to look specifically at doing teamwork, working in teams, this is a great book, as well as collaborative data analysis using MaxQDA Team Cloud. So if you want to look at some of the considerations, specifically how this would function with Team Cloud, if you're considering purchasing that for your organization, this is a great resource as well. There's a specific, hopefully that didn't screw things up there for people seeing the many views. There's also some specific things in the manual. There's a specific one for Team Cloud. So if you want to look at some of the considerations of Team Cloud, this right here, the Quick Start Team Cloud Getting Started Guide is an excellent resource. It's very concise. It just tells you just what you need to know to get set up and get started with the process. So definitely check that out if you are interested in switching over to Team Cloud for the team-based analysis that you do. Let me pop back and see if there's any other questions here. In Team Cloud, can the team leader also be an analyst? Yes. Yeah, they can provide analysis as well. So they can contribute to those. Contribute to that. They do need to be a little bit careful there because there's different places that you can work either from a local project file or from the Team Cloud file. So just make sure that you're working in the right spot so that you don't have any conflicts with that project. Could you please show how to import open-ended survey questions? Sure. Open-ended survey questions. So if you're doing work with survey data, there's a couple options. You can use an Excel spreadsheet option, which is probably the most common way to get stuff in. If you have SurveyMonkey, there's also API where you can connect to your actual survey libraries. And so you can pull that stuff in, or if you're using SPSS as well, you can pull stuff in. And so I think I have some survey data on here. Let me just double check. Let's see. Yes, I do, right here. So if I open this up, what this is going to allow me to do, when you're working with survey data, each row in your table is going to be an individual respondent, and each column of your table is going to be one aspect of that respondent. So you can treat these things as variables. You can also treat them as codes. So typically your variables are going to be the sort of more like categorical stuff, right? That has a set number of values. This can include stuff like Likert data, satisfied, dissatisfied, and things that you'll code will want to be those open-ended responses. So when you get this table, it's going to ask you if you want to specify a certain document group. We're going to create a new one. You usually want a response ID column. If you export something from Qualtrics, you'll always get this. It'll give you a unique code that you'll use. And so this is what's going to give your actual document name. You can code this. You don't have to. It'll appear in your actual display if you do that. MaxQDA is pretty smart. It will find which are the open-ended responses in most cases. Sometimes you do need to do a little bit of cleaning with this, because if your questions are very long, MAXQDA is only going to auto code the first like 63 characters. So you may need to condense things so that it makes sense. Because if you have something like where the question is the same for those first 63 characters and it changes at the end, you can't tell which is which. So some of that data will get pulled into a memo, but it's just decent practice to do that on the outset. So you get a preview then of how all this stuff gets imported. So your variable values and your text values. If I click import, you'll see now that I have auto-coded these open-ended responses, and each survey respondent is a document. And so that allows you to do some interesting things with MAXQDA, just leveraging counts and all that good stuff. It's also advisable to create something like survey responses. And then what I like to do is to drag my open-ended responses in there. When I go to use my categorize, oops, wrong button. When I go to use my categorize survey data tool, I can then pull this in. And it will have all of my responses. So I can look through all of the open-ended responses. Otherwise, you'll have to do it one by one. So having them as a subcode there is kind of handy. There's some good webinars on specifically on working with survey data, and there's a full textbook on categorizing open-ended survey data I'd point you towards as well if you're looking for more information. Yeah, one last question here. Do you have experience reconciling code differences when running inter-code agreement? And if so, what is the most efficient way you have found to remove codes applied to the group? The group decides to apply to the segment. I mean, as far as removing codes, you know, just once you delete them in your code system, the attachment in your document goes away. So as far as removing them, there are ways, you know, if you apply a code from your document browser, it's additive. If I apply a code from my retrieve segments window, I got to activate some data here. If I apply a code from here, it actually replaces it. So that's one option for you if you're trying to just outright replace things. There's also ways that you can move code, move coded segments. If it's as simple as moving a subcode to another parent code, you know, you can do that via right click. You know, you can move coded segments. So you can move things around in your code system as well. There's also some other ways to look at stuff. You know, if you use your overview of coded segments, you can look at things, and I can customize this here to just some specific comments. So let's just do comment code and preview. I think preview's already, oh, here it is, preview. I can customize this so I can look at things here. I can actually, this can be just a little bit of a cleaner workspace to work with sometimes. You can also change that in your retrieve segments window. Again, it's just finding a system that is just nice for you to work with, just removing any of that extraneous information. Yeah, organizing your code system like that sometimes can get a little bit messy as things change over time. So I guess I don't know if I have a exact step-by-step process. Last question, I'm not clear on the difference between merge and import functions. Merge is, so again, if you have project files with two completely different sets of documents. So I have survey data in one, interview data in one, merge is going to be best, right? Because you're putting two different things together. Problem with merge is sometimes you get duplicates. When you do an import, when you do an export import, you can select the specific things that you want. So merge takes the entire project file, export like an exchange file. When I export something, I get to select what I want. So I can choose the documents, I can choose the codes. So it's just more precise. Basically, that's if you're working in duplicate files. So you and I have the same file, and I worked in one place and you worked in another place in that file, I can select that particular data. Hopefully that clears it up for you. But I think we are up against time here. I want to make sure that I'm respectful of the next sessions that are coming up. Thank you for attending today. It was great to be here with you all. I hope that you took something away from the team session today, and I hope that you've had a great time at MAXDAYS, and we hope to see you again in the future. So thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.